Jack had always been a man of the land. He wasn't interested in the distractions of the modern world, social media, flashy gadgets, or big city life. He preferred the sound of birds singing at dawn, the steady hum of his tractor, and the feel of dirt between his fingers as he worked his crops. For as long as he could remember, the farm had been his home. It was his father's farm before him, and his grandfather's before that. It wasn't a large piece of land, but it was his, and that made it special. It wasn't an easy life. The work was hard, and every season brought its own challenges. Some years the harvests were good and the crops flourished. Other years the weather didn't cooperate, or the market prices dropped and Jack would be left scraping by. Lately it had been the latter. The farm's soil had been giving him trouble, and despite all his efforts, the crops just weren't yielding like they used to. Jack knew that without a good harvest this year, he might have to sell the farm, a thought that weighed heavily on him. He spent his days working in the fields, trying to make the best of things. Every day felt the same, long, tiring, and often lonely. He was used to being alone. He didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think. But lately something felt different. It wasn't just the worry over his crops. It was a nagging feeling that something was off about the land. It started a few weeks ago when Jack noticed something strange near the edge of his property, where the woods began. He wasn't sure what had caught his attention at first. It was just a small patch of land, an area he didn't visit often, but for some reason it seemed different. The grass was too neatly cut. The ground was smoother than he remembered, and the bushes that usually grew wild in that spot were oddly sparse. Jack wasn't one to believe in superstitions, but the place felt wrong, like something was hidden there, waiting to be discovered. For a while, Jack tried to ignore the feeling. He had too much on his plate to worry about strange patches of land. But every time he passed by that area, the sense of unease grew stronger. Finally, on a day when the sun was setting low in the sky, casting long shadows over the farm, Jack decided to investigate. He grabbed his shovel and made his way toward the spot. The closer he got, the more the hair on the back of his neck stood up. There was something strange about the way the land lay. It almost seemed like it had been cleared deliberately. The underbrush wasn't as thick as it should have been, and the dirt looked freshly disturbed. Though Jack couldn't remember the last time he had worked this part of the farm, curious, he began to clear away some of the grass and loose dirt. His hands were steady, but inside his heart was racing. What was he expecting to find? He wasn't sure. A hidden treasure? A forgotten well? Or was it all just his imagination running wild? As he cleared away the last of the overgrown grass, his shovel struck something hard. Startled, Jack knelt down and pushed the dirt aside with his hands. There, partially buried in the earth, was the edge of what looked like a metal door. His heart skipped a beat. It was old, rusted, and weathered, but there was no mistaking it. It was a door. Jack stared at it for a long moment, unsure of what to think. His first instinct was to step back, to walk away, but something about the discovery pulled him closer. He wiped his hands on his jeans and examined the door more closely. The metal was cold to the touch, and there was an intricate design carved into the surface. It wasn't like any door he'd ever seen before. There was no handle or lock, only a series of strange markings along the edges. Jack's mind raced. Could this be some kind of buried treasure chest? He had heard of stories where people found old hidden vaults, and the idea of discovering something valuable was too tempting to ignore. But then again, why would someone bury a door in the middle of his farm? He stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it all. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills, and the sky had begun to darken. Jack knew he should probably leave the area and return to his house, but his curiosity had been piqued. He wanted to know what lay beneath that strange door. With a deep breath, Jack crouched down and placed his hands on the metal surface. The door was cold, almost unnaturally so, and it creaked as he applied pressure to it. For a moment he thought it was stuck, but then it began to give way. Slowly it started to budge, inch by inch. Jack's pulse quickened. What was he about to uncover? Finally, with one last push, the door creaked open, revealing a dark opening beneath it. A gust of cold air rushed up from the depths, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. He stood frozen, staring down into the pitch-black hole. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. His breath caught in his throat. There was something undeniably eerie about the hole. It felt like something ancient, something that had been hidden away for a reason. Jack didn't know whether to feel excitement or fear. For a moment, he simply stood there, his mind racing. What was this door? Why was it here? He had half a mind to walk away, to leave it all behind and pretend he had never found it. But the other half of him, the part that couldn't resist a mystery, urged him forward. He knew he had to find out what lay on the other side. Jack grabbed his flashlight from his bag and aimed the beam of light into the hole. It illuminated a set of stone steps leading down into the darkness. The steps were uneven and old, covered in dirt and moss. It looked like no one had been down there in a very long time. Jack hesitated. This wasn't just some old storage cellar. This was something different. Something much older. And yet, despite the unease bubbling inside him, he felt an overwhelming urge to go down there. With one last glance over his shoulder, Jack decided to go for it. He carefully stepped down onto the first stone step, then the next. The air grew colder as he descended, and the beam of light from his flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The steps seemed to go on forever, leading deeper and deeper into the earth. His heart was pounding now, but Jack kept going. The deeper he went, the more he felt like he was crossing some sort of threshold, into a world that had been lost to time. By the time he reached the bottom, the air was thick and damp, and the walls of the passage were covered in strange markings, symbols he couldn't understand. As Jack reached the bottom of the steps and looked around, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just begun. The land he had worked on his entire life, the land that felt so familiar to him, suddenly seemed foreign and full of hidden secrets. Jack wasn't sure where this path would lead him, but there was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt truly alive. As Jack stepped further into the darkness, the air grew thicker, and the eerie silence settled around him. The only sound was the soft crunch of dirt beneath his boots and the faint rustling of his breath. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the stone walls of what seemed like an underground chamber. It was as if time itself had forgotten this place. Everything felt still, untouched, and yet the weight of something ancient and powerful hung in the air. The passage was narrow, and the walls were covered with strange markings that Jack couldn't make sense of. They looked almost like symbols, but they were unlike anything he had ever seen. Some were geometric, others flowing, like a language lost to history. Jack felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise as he traced his fingers over one of the carvings, but he quickly pulled his hand back, unsure whether it was a good idea to touch anything in such a strange place. His heart was pounding, but Jack couldn't turn back now. He had to know what was down here. There was a curiosity in him that he couldn't shake. What was this hidden space? Why had it been buried for so long? And who had left these markings behind? He walked a few more steps, the beam of his flashlight dancing over the walls, illuminating fragments of what looked like old paintings, faded and chipped with age. The colors were muted, but Jack could make out figures in the artwork. Figures that looked like people but dressed in strange, almost ceremonial clothing. Some were holding objects that seemed familiar, but others were unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The more he looked, the more he felt like these paintings were trying to tell him something, like there was a message hidden within them. Jack paused for a moment, his mind racing with questions. How long had this place been hidden? What was the purpose of the door? The idea of an old treasure or relic crossed his mind, but then he remembered the warning that had flashed through his mind earlier, the one that urged him to be careful. Was there something more dangerous down here? Was he walking into a trap? His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of something scraping against the stone floor. Jack froze. For a moment he thought it might be an animal, but there was no movement, no rustling in the dark. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the sound. But there was only silence. Shaking off the unease, Jack continued down the passage. The air felt colder now, and the walls seemed to close in on him, narrowing as he moved forward. He tried to steady his nerves, but a part of him couldn't help but feel like something was watching him. There was no logical explanation for it, of course. Nothing in the world could be watching him from the shadows. But still, the feeling persisted. Eventually, the passage opened up into a larger room. The change in space was immediate and dramatic. The walls here were taller, and the floor was covered in a layer of dust that had clearly been undisturbed for a long time. The room was vast, with no sign of any recent human presence. Jack's flashlight revealed what looked like a series of old wooden crates scattered across the floor. Some stacked, some toppled over. They were covered in dirt and cobwebs, making it clear that no one had been down here in decades, maybe even centuries. In the middle of the room, there was a large stone altar, standing solitary and imposing. It was carved with intricate patterns that matched those on the walls, and something about it felt significant. Jack's eyes flickered to the altar, and then to the rest of the room. The crates, the dust, the markings, everything seemed to be connected, like a puzzle that was just waiting to be solved. Jack took a deep breath and made his way toward the altar. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe a hidden treasure or a relic of some sort, but there was something about the altar that intrigued him. As he got closer, he noticed that the stone wasn't as solid as it appeared. In fact, there was a slight indentation in the middle, almost as if something had been placed there, something that had been removed long ago. As he knelt down to inspect the altar more closely, Jack's flashlight flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. He scanned the walls once more, noticing that they were covered in even more markings, symbols, and what looked like writing. Jack couldn't read any of it, but he could feel that the language, whatever it was, held meaning. This was no ordinary place. It was something much older, something beyond the scope of anything Jack had ever imagined. He took a step back, trying to take it all in. What was the significance of this room? Who had built it and why? Was this a place of worship? A hidden chamber for an ancient society? Or had it been something else altogether? His flashlight beam moved from one corner of the room to the other, but nothing else stood out. Nothing except the crates. Jack approached one of the crates cautiously, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the lid. It was heavy and the wood creaked as he lifted it. Inside, he found nothing but more dust and a few scraps of old fabric that had long since decayed. He frowned and moved to the next crate, determined to find something that would make sense of all this. As he opened the second crate, his heart skipped a beat. This time there was something inside, a small leather-bound book. It was old, the cover cracked and worn, but there was no mistaking it. Jack felt a wave of excitement mixed with fear. What was this book? Was it a journal, a diary? He couldn't help but feel that it was important, more important than anything he had found so far. Jack carefully picked it up, the weight of the book feeling strangely significant in his hands. He opened the cover and the faint smell of mildew filled the air. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. It was handwritten, the ink faded but clear enough for Jack to read. As he skimmed through the first few pages, he realized that it was a journal of someone who had lived long ago, someone who had been connected to this place. The writing in the journal was strange, almost cryptic. It described the building of the underground room, the hiding of something powerful beneath the earth. The writer spoke of protecting it from the world above, of sealing it away to keep its secrets safe. Jack's heart raced as he read on. The journal seemed to suggest that there was something beneath the altar, something dangerous, something that should never be disturbed. Jack's mind raced with questions. What could be so important that someone would go to such lengths to hide it? And what was the artifact the journal spoke of? Was it still here beneath the altar, waiting to be uncovered? Suddenly, Jack felt the weight of the situation settling in. He wasn't just exploring an old room or finding forgotten treasure. He was uncovering something much bigger than that. Something that had been hidden away for a reason. His instincts told him to stop, to leave this place and never look back. But his curiosity kept pulling him forward. The journal had mentioned an artifact. Was it buried beneath the altar? What if uncovering it meant unleashing something dangerous? Or perhaps the artifact could be the key to saving the farm, the thing that could change everything for him. Jack closed the journal, his hands shaking. He looked back at the altar, then at the crates around the room. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but the feeling that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary wouldn't go away. And so, despite every warning, every instinct telling him to turn around, Jack knew that he couldn't leave without finding out the truth. With renewed determination, Jack moved toward the altar once more, his flashlight beam illuminating the stone surface. He wasn't sure what he was about to uncover, but deep down he knew that this discovery, whatever it was, would change his life forever. Jack stood in front of the altar, his mind racing. The journal in his hands felt heavier than ever, its cryptic words still echoing in his thoughts. Something powerful was hidden here, the journal had said. He had no idea what that something was, but his curiosity had been set loose, and now there was no turning back. The room around him was still, the air thick with dust and the scent of something long forgotten. He could hear his own breathing in the silence, feel his heart beating faster with each passing second. His fingers tightened around the journal, but he didn't take his eyes off the altar. He was drawn to it, as if something was calling to him from beneath the stone surface. The altar was large, rectangular, and carved with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with ancient energy. Jack had examined it before, but now standing in front of it with the journal in his hands, it seemed different. There was an undeniable weight to it, as if it wasn't just a stone slab, it was a key, a gateway to something that had been hidden for generations. He placed the journal down carefully on the ground and knelt before the altar. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, but deep inside he knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. The journal had spoken of a powerful artifact, something that had been sealed away for protection. Jack didn't know what kind of artifact it could be, but the idea of it, something valuable, something ancient, filled him with both excitement and a creeping sense of dread. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he wanted to understand this place, how much he needed to know what had been hidden here, why it had been buried so deep beneath the earth. His farm was in trouble, and maybe, just maybe, this was the answer to everything. But as Jack stared at the altar, doubts crept in. What if this was a mistake? What if he was about to uncover something dangerous, something that should have remained hidden forever? He shook the thought from his mind. He wasn't going to back out now. He had come too far. Taking a deep breath, Jack stood up and placed both hands on the altar. He felt the cool stone beneath his palms, the weight of the years that had passed since anyone had last touched it. There was no handle, no obvious way to open it. It was a solid block, but Jack was determined. He needed to know. He ran his fingers over the surface, tracing the intricate carvings. As he did, something strange happened. The stone seemed to shift beneath his touch. It wasn't a physical shift, more like a subtle change, an almost imperceptible movement. Jack pulled his hands back quickly, startled. Had he imagined it? The altar was still, unmoving, but the sensation lingered in his mind. He didn't waste any more time thinking about it. Jack wasn't sure why, but he felt sure that the altar was hiding something. He needed to find a way to open it, to uncover whatever it was that had been sealed inside. Maybe it was a relic. Maybe it was an artifact. Maybe it was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. Jack took a step back, his eyes scanning the altar once more. There was a faint groove running along the edge, barely visible beneath the dust and grime that had accumulated over the years. It was a small detail, but Jack couldn't help but think it might be important. He crouched down to get a closer look, running his fingers along the groove. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. Jack's flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the stone walls. For a moment, he thought he heard a sound, like something shifting in the darkness just beyond the reach of the light. He froze, holding his breath. Was someone else down here with him? The thought made his heart race. But there was no movement, no sound except for his own breath. Still, the feeling of unease wouldn't leave him. Jack tried to shake it off and focus on the task at hand. He pushed his doubts aside and concentrated on the groove in the altar. With a slight push, he noticed that the stone seemed to give way just slightly. He pressed harder and the stone moved again, this time with a faint grinding sound. Jack's pulse quickened. The altar was opening. Slowly, carefully, the stone slab began to slide away, revealing a dark space underneath. The feeling of anticipation surged inside him. Jack leaned forward, trying to peer into the opening, but the darkness swallowed the light from his flashlight. It was impossible to see anything. He needed to go deeper, needed to know what lay hidden in the shadows. Jack stepped back, the ground beneath him creaking slightly as if the whole room had been disturbed. He hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences. Should he step away now? Leave this place and seal it all up again? But then the thought of the artifact, of the mystery of the answers, made him move forward. He grabbed his flashlight, turned it on, and aimed the beam into the dark opening. The light flickered a few times before stabilizing, and for the first time, Jack could see what was beneath the altar. What he saw left him speechless. At first, he could only make out the outline of something metallic. It was large, heavy, and clearly ancient. The surface was covered in dust, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a chest, a large, ornate chest hidden away beneath the altar, its metal surface glinting faintly in the flashlight's light. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was what the journal had been talking about. The artifact, the treasure, the secret that had been kept hidden for centuries. The chest was massive, at least 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. It had intricate carvings along its surface, similar to the ones on the altar and the walls of the room. The symbols were familiar now, after all the time Jack had spent studying the markings, but there was something else about the chest, something that seemed to radiate power. Jack took a cautious step forward, the floor creaking beneath his weight. His fingers trembled as he reached out toward the chest. He wasn't sure what he expected to find inside, but he knew that whatever it was important. This was the reason the room had been hidden, the reason the altar had been sealed. This chest held something that was not meant to be disturbed, but despite the warnings, Jack couldn't resist. He reached down and placed both hands on the chest, lifting it just enough to get a better grip. It was heavier than he had anticipated, and he struggled for a moment before managing to get the chest out from beneath the altar. As he pulled it free, a sudden rush of cold air seemed to fill the room, and Jack stumbled back, startled. The room felt different now. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sense of power that had been building in his chest only grew stronger. Jack set the chest down on the floor, his hands shaking with excitement and fear. What was inside? What had been sealed away for so long? With a deep breath, Jack knelt down and reached for the latch. It was old, rusted, but still intact. He pulled at it, and with a creak, the chest slowly opened. Inside, wrapped in layers of old cloth, was a small, ornate box. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The box was made of wood, covered in delicate gold leaf and inlaid with precious stones that shimmered in the flashlight's beam. There was something undeniably otherworldly about it, something that made Jack's heart race even faster. He reached for the box, his hands trembling as he lifted it out of the chest. The moment he touched it, he felt a strange energy pulse through him. It was as if the box was alive, responding to his touch. Jack felt a rush of heat, followed by a strange coldness, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he was imagining it. The box felt heavy in his hands, and yet at the same time it felt fragile. Jack couldn't explain it, but he knew without a doubt that this was what he had been searching for. This was the artifact, the object that had been hidden away for centuries. But as Jack held the box, a new feeling began to creep over him, a feeling of dread, as though he had just unlocked something that should have stayed hidden forever. He didn't know what it was, but the energy around him had shifted. And now, as he stood there in the darkness, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. The room seemed to close in on him, and for the first time Jack questioned whether he had made the right choice. What was this box? What was its purpose? And what had he just unleashed by opening it? Jack's fingers trembled as he held the small wooden box. The strange sensation he had felt when he touched it had only intensified. It was as if something ancient was stirring within him, a force that had been dormant for centuries. The air around him seemed to hum, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The room, once silent, now felt alive with tension. He carefully placed the box on the stone floor, almost as if afraid it might slip from his hands and disappear back into the darkness. His mind was racing, each thought tumbling over the last, but there was one thing Jack knew for sure. He had to know what was inside. His heart pounded as he reached for the box again, this time more deliberately, more cautiously. The surface was cold to the touch, the wood smooth and polished, but there was an undeniable weight to it. He ran his fingers over the gold inlays, the stones that shimmered faintly even in the dim light of the flashlight. The symbols carved into the box matched the ones in the room, the same mysterious script that had haunted him ever since he first stepped into the underground chamber. Jack's breath caught in his throat. What was this box? What was it meant to hold? He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the lid. His mind screamed at him to stop, to leave it alone, but his curiosity pushed him forward. The box was a key, and he needed to unlock its secrets. With a deep breath, he slowly lifted the lid. The moment it opened, a wave of cold air seemed to rush out, almost as if the box had been sealed for far longer than it appeared. Jack recoiled, a chill running down his spine. But despite the strange sensation, he peered inside. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. The interior of the box was deep, deeper than he had expected, and the flashlight's beam seemed to vanish into the shadows. But as he leaned in closer, his eyes caught something that reflected the light. A small polished stone lay at the bottom of the box, nestled in a bed of velvet cloth. The stone glowed faintly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to send a shiver through Jack's body. He reached inside, his hands moving almost instinctively, and took hold of the stone. It was cool to the touch, but the moment he held it, a strange energy coursed through him. His pulse quickened, and for a brief moment he felt as though the entire room was spinning around him. The stone felt alive in his hands, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost like a heartbeat. Jack's fingers tightened around it, but as he did, a strange voice seemed to whisper in his mind. It wasn't a voice he could hear with his ears, but a presence, something that resonated deep within him. "You shouldn't have opened it." Jack's heart stopped. The voice was faint, almost like an echo, but it was there, clear as day. His head jerked around, but the room remained still, empty. The shadows stretched across the walls, nothing moving, nothing out of place. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The stone pulsed in his hands again, and the voice seemed to grow louder. "You must return it." Jack's breath quickened. Was it just his imagination? Was he losing his mind down here? The voice had been so clear, so certain, but it made no sense. He was alone in this underground chamber, wasn't he? His grip on the stone tightened, and in that moment the room seemed to change. The walls shifted, subtly at first, and then more dramatically. The markings on the stone seemed to move, twisting and swirling as though they were alive. The ground beneath Jack's feet trembled slightly, and for a moment he thought he felt the very foundation of the chamber shaking. The voice in his mind became more urgent. "You cannot keep it. It is not for you. It must return to where it came from." Jack stumbled backward, the stone still gripped tightly in his hands. His mind raced. What was happening? Why did he feel as though he had made a terrible mistake? The atmosphere in the room had changed completely, turning oppressive, as if the very air was pushing in on him. The sense of power that had been in the chamber when he first arrived had now turned into something darker, more threatening. He needed to get out. He needed to leave this place before whatever had been awakened by the stone consumed him. Jack turned and bolted for the passageway, his heart pounding in his chest. The wall seemed to close in behind him as he ran, the narrow passage suddenly feeling much longer than it had before. The darkness was thick now, the silence deafening, and the oppressive weight of the chamber seemed to follow him. As he rounded the corner toward the entrance, the light from his flashlight flickered once again, casting long shadows across the stone walls. He kept running, his footsteps echoing off the stone, but no matter how fast he moved, it felt like the darkness was chasing him, closing in from all sides. Just as he neared the door, something stopped him. A figure, tall and shrouded in shadow, appeared at the entrance. The figure was nothing more than a silhouette, but its presence was overwhelming. It stood still, unmoving, watching him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Was it the voice? Had it come to warn him? Or had something else, something far darker, been awakened by his discovery? The figure didn't move, but Jack could feel its gaze on him, pressing down on him like a weight on his chest. His hands were shaking, the stone still clutched tightly in his palm. He couldn't stop staring at the figure, unable to look away. The figure was silent, but there was a feeling in the air, a presence that seemed to speak directly to him. "You should not have come." Jack's knees nearly buckled, but he managed to stay on his feet. He knew deep down that the figure wasn't there to help him. It was there to stop him from leaving, to prevent him from taking the stone out of the chamber. He backed away slowly, trying to keep his focus. The figure remained motionless, but Jack could feel the weight of its gaze on him. It was as though time itself had stopped. The air was thick with an energy Jack couldn't comprehend. But he knew one thing for certain: if he didn't leave now, he might never get the chance again. With one last desperate glance at the figure, Jack turned and ran. He couldn't look back. He had no idea what was chasing him, but the feeling of being hunted was undeniable. The chamber seemed to pulse with the energy of whatever had been hidden beneath the altar, and he could feel it behind him, following his every step. Finally, Jack reached the door that had seemed so insignificant when he first found it. Now it was his only hope. He reached for the handle, his fingers numb, and with one final burst of strength, he threw the door open. Light flooded into the passageway, and for the first time since he had entered the chamber, Jack felt the weight of the darkness lift. The oppressive energy that had filled the room was gone, but even as he stepped out into the daylight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. The presence, the shadow, had followed him out of the chamber. Jack didn't know what he had uncovered, or what dangers lay ahead, but one thing was clear. He had unleashed something that had been sealed away for a reason. and he didn't know if he would be able to stop it from spreading. The moment Jack stepped out of the chamber, he felt a strange sense of relief, but it was short-lived. The sunlight, though blinding at first, didn't seem to warm him the way it should have. The cool breeze on his skin felt too cold. Every nerve in his body screamed that something wasn't right. The peacefulness of the world around him, the birds chirping, the rustling leaves was a stark contrast to the weight that pressed down on his chest. He was outside, in the open air, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched. The shadowy figure he had seen in the doorway of the chamber seemed to be lurking in the back of his mind, its dark presence a constant nagging thought. And as the minutes passed, the sense of dread only grew stronger. Jack walked quickly back to his truck, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here, not now. He needed to get home, lock the doors, and figure out what to do next. But the stone in his hand, the small ancient object, felt heavier with every step, as if it was pulling him back toward the chamber. He wanted to drop it, leave it behind, but something deep inside kept him from doing so. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like he had no choice. The voice, the strange whispers in his mind, still echoed in his thoughts. It is not for you. You must return it. But he didn't know where. He didn't know how. The journal hadn't said anything about what to do with the stone. All it had spoken of was the power, the artifact, and the warnings of its danger. Jack reached his truck, but as he climbed into the driver's seat, the weight in his chest grew heavier. He tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just fear. Maybe it was just his imagination running wild. He was tired, worn out from everything that had happened. The days of searching, the discovery of the chamber, and now this strange object and the fear that had come with it. He needed rest, he thought. But the voice kept whispering louder now. It is not for you. It must be returned. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, frustrated. What do you want from me? He muttered aloud, the words feeling empty in the air. But there was no answer, only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of the highway. Jack started the truck and pulled out of the driveway, trying to clear his mind. The road was quiet, the small rural town he lived in still asleep save for the occasional car passing by. But as he drove, something felt different. The world outside seemed more muted, as if the colors were fading. The trees on the side of the road, the houses, even the sky, it all seemed a little less real. Like a painting losing its vibrancy, turning to shades of gray. He glanced down at the stone in his hand, now resting in his lap. It was glowing faintly again, just as it had when he first held it. The glow was subtle, but it was enough to draw his attention, pulling him in like a magnet. He felt it then, a sudden tug deep within his chest. It wasn't just the stone. It was something else, something much bigger, the pull of the unknown, the weight of the secrets he had uncovered. The sense that he had no choice but to follow the path that had been set before him. The pull grew stronger the farther he drove, and soon he found himself leaving the main road. Without realizing it, his hands had turned the wheel, guiding the truck toward the forest. The trees seemed to stretch higher as he entered the dense woods, the path growing narrower, less traveled. It was as if the world around him was trying to block his way, but Jack couldn't stop. He didn't know how or why, but he felt like he had no choice but to follow the road that was leading him. The forest was silent. Not a single bird, not a single rustle of leaves. It was eerie, unnerving, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel, and the stone's glow seemed to intensify, its light flickering in rhythm with his racing heart. The truck's headlights barely pierced the darkness now, the trees growing thicker and more oppressive the deeper he went. Finally, the road opened up into a clearing, and Jack slammed on the brakes. His eyes widened in disbelief. He had arrived. It was the same clearing, the same place from the dream. The altar, the stone, the symbols. It was all there, exactly as it had been when he first stepped into that forgotten room. The ground was uneven and the air felt heavy as if it had been waiting for him. The stone in his hand pulsed again, and Jack felt the same strange energy surrounding him, pushing him forward. He was back where it all began. Jack stared at the altar, its cold stone surface almost gleaming in the dim light of his headlights. The symbols carved into the altar were now familiar, though still cryptic. His fingers ached to place the stone back, to return it to its rightful place. But something held him back. Something in his gut told him that once he placed it there would be no turning back. His mind screamed at him to run, to leave this place and never look back. But the pull was too strong. With trembling hands, Jack climbed out of the truck and walked toward the altar. The stone felt warm in his palm, almost as though it was alive. The air seemed to crackle with energy as he neared the altar. Each step felt heavier, as if the weight of his decision was growing, pressing down on him. He reached the altar and slowly placed the stone onto its center. The moment it touched the surface, the ground beneath him shook, a low rumble vibrating through the air. Jack staggered back, his heart racing, but the stone remained still. He thought he saw something, an image perhaps, or a shadow, flicker at the edge of his vision. He blinked, but it was gone. The rumbling stopped, and for a moment everything was still. Then, a voice spoke, loud, clear, and unmistakable, as if coming from everywhere at once. "You have returned what was taken. The balance is restored." Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat. The voice wasn't just in his mind this time. It filled the air around him, vibrating through his very bones. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You have done what was required. But know this, the path ahead is still uncertain. The balance has been restored, but it will not remain. You must prepare." The voice faded, leaving only an echo in the air. Jack stood motionless, his hands still shaking from the encounter. The stone was no longer glowing, but its energy lingered, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the strange force lifted. The air felt lighter, less oppressive. The glowing symbols on the altar faded, the pulsing energy vanishing as though it had never been. Jack turned slowly, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had returned the stone just as the voice had demanded. But what had he done? What had he set in motion by bringing it back? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing. Whatever he had uncovered, whatever secret had been hidden in that chamber for so long, wasn't finished. The voice had warned him, but it had also said that the balance would not remain. Jack didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't stop now. He had uncovered the truth, and that truth had come with a price. The balance had been restored for now. But for how long? As he walked back to his truck, Jack realized that his journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.